her number? Is that what you said?
I'll text you.
Texted.
Okay.
Okay. Thank
Welcome,
you.
everyone.
Hi.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Good
Rabbi
evening.
Levy.
Thank you for joining us this evening.
Rabbi,
Good to
Thank
see
you.
you. Good to see you, Judy. Good to see you, Linda. Good to
Thank
see you,
you.
Lisa and Anita. Thank you for joining us.
Sure.
Let us dive right into it. So we are in lesson 4, and our conversation, which I've promised you many times, is going to be about point and counterpoint. As we'll see, we're going to be discussing the place for arguments in Torah, which I think was a question that many people had on their mind. Okay, to begin, so here's the following scenario. So Sam and Mark get lost in the desert, and they're traveling with some water, and Sam finishes an entire canteen of water, and Mark still has some water. And the question becomes that today is Sunday, and if Sam doesn't drink any water today, Sam will definitely not live out the day, God forbid. However, they're not going to get to the next town till Tuesday. And if Mark shears his water, then perhaps they will both live till Monday the next day. But they both will not be able to make it to town on Tuesday. So the question is, should Mark be shearing his water with Sam or not? Does anyone want to state their opinion?
I would think that Mark would want to share his water with Sam.
He should share his water with Sam.
Yes, I feel he should share his water with
And you
Sam.
don't feel like he's
They're
putting his life
together.
at risk.
He may be putting his life at risk, but if you're optimistic in feeling Hashem, if you want to say, if Hashem is I'm in this situation and Hashem is always with me, I'm going to make every effort. We could share a little less, each one of us, minimally, or work out a plan and try to make it work so that we could salvage both our lives.
Okay, I hear you. Judy, you wanted to share your opinion.
I think no. If they both had the same amount of water to start with, and if we know for a fact that one of them will live if he doesn't share the water, why should two people die when one person could live?
Great. Love that as well. Lisa?
So I think the halakha is that you have to save yourself first, and then you save the others.
Okay, so we'll see about that, but I was asking you your opinion. What do you think?
My opinion is always what halakha is, but
We
yeah.
have two opinions here. We have Lisa's opinion, we have Linda's opinion, and we have Judy's opinion. And my question for you is, are you surprised that there are differing opinions here?
No,
Does it
No,
bother you
that's
that there is an argument happening here in this classroom? And I would say no. Everyone understands that when it comes to um, matters of morality, and in general, right and wrong, it's not necessarily black and white. So it would make sense that there's different opinions. And I think the same thing applies to Talmudic argument. And going back to Lisa's point, we'll see this later. Actually, this question is an argument in the Talmud, with one rabbi stating like Linda and the other rabbi stating like Judy. This is an argument in the Talmud itself. So regarding the great question, how could there be debate in the Talmud? You would say the simple answer is because different people, different opinions. Two Jews, two opinions. What's really the question? What's the big deal? The problem is that we in our class have stated that the Torah, the Oral Torah, and the Talmud, as we know it today, is the Word of God. This is what God's opinion is. So it's very nice that when you have a moral question or ethical question, you can have an argument between Linda and Judy, but you don't have an argument in terms of what someone's opinion was. I cannot argue now with Lisa about what Linda's opinion was. That's a fact. Linda's was either A or B. How could we possibly argue that one person saying it was A and the other person saying it was B? If we are trying to say that the Torah is actually the word of God, Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the oral Torah, just as he came in with the written Torah. Just like the written Torah has no disputes, has no debate, one would think that our tradition too has no debates. And if it does have debates, if there's debate as to what is the tradition, what God told us at Mount Sinai, doesn't that undermine the entire truth of oral Torah? Isn't the message there that we don't have proper tradition, that we didn't hold on to what we were told, and perhaps people forgot things, and therefore there's argument. So if I were to sum this up in very short, how could we say that there's two opinions and both of them are the word of God? Did God say A or did God say B? There's a great joke, a great story that there was a new rabbi that came to town in this new shul, and on the first Shabbos in the shul, they come to the Shema, and half the shul stands up and the other half of the shul sits down. So the rabbi inquires what's going on over here. So he finds out that there's this huge argument straight down the middle. And the entire shul starts arguing with each other, with the half sitting down starts screaming at the half standing up to sit down, and the half that's standing is screaming at the half that's sitting to stand. And there's this argument about what you're supposed to be doing in the shul. What's the custom of the shul? And they're both arguing, what do you mean? This was always the custom. This is what my Zaidi did. This is what his Zaidi did. This is the custom of the shul. And both of them are insisting about the custom of the shul. So finally, the rabbi mixes in and he says, let's find out what's actually the custom. So he asks, is there anyone that's been in this shul for some time that could tell us what happened, 50 years ago, 60 years ago? So they find out that there's one old Jew who's living in an old age home somewhere, and he used to spend time in the shul as a child, and he would remember long back what the custom of the shul was. So they go to him, and the rabbi turns to him and he says, what could I help you with? And he says, listen, I brought these two people here, and they each represent two halves of the shul, and they're arguing about the custom. So he says, what's the argument? Let me hear. So one of them says, isn't the custom of the shul that by Shema we all stand up and we say the Shema standing up? He said, no, that was not the custom. The other one says, so isn't the custom of the shul that when we say the Shema we all sit down and we say the Shema sitting down? He says, no, that was not the custom. So they say, so what was the custom? He said, the custom was that half the shul stood and half the shul sat, and we argued about it. Okay, so the question here is, how is Talmudic debate fit? How does that fit with the fact that Torah is true? What we're going to be doing today is we're going to really boil this down to 4 questions. Question number 1 is, why don't the Talmudic debate undermine the validity of the entire halachic system? So halacha is telling us this is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do, this is what God said to do, this is what God said not to do. And suddenly we have a debate which seems to undermine that entire premise. Question number 2, which areas of Jewish law are subject to debate and difference of opinion? So are there areas of Jewish law which there is not any debate and no debate will ever exist? That will be our second question, which essentially will answer our first question. Number 3, why is there disagreement? Why would God want and or allow this? So the third question would be, if based on our belief, God set up the system, God gave us the Torah, and he set up the system of the Oral Torah, so why did he give room for debate? Why does he want debate? And finally, the last question is, how are the debates resolved? If there is debates, so then how do we decide what the halacha is? Okay, so join me on page 113 in your booklets, and we have a quick exercise over here. And this exercise is going to address the second question that we asked. Which areas of Jewish laws are subject to debate and which areas of Jewish law are not subject to debate? What you see in this exercise is you see the 4 categories of oral law that we've discovered in the last 3 classes. the oral law that was received directly from Moses. Moses came down from Mount Sinai and told us what God told him. Then there's the oral law that's derived, the law that we learned out through the 13 principles that God gave us to derive from the Torah. And then there's the legislations, and then there's the customs. And I want you to mark from 1 to 5 which ones would be the most likely to have debate and which ones would be the least likely to have debate.
1 to 4 or 1 to 5?
I think you have 1 to 5 on your page, yes?
Oh,
Five.
yes, got it.
And 5 is the most debatable.
Oh, okay.
Adi, welcome. I didn't notice that you came in. And BA, welcome as well. Okay. Does anyone want to share with us? So, does anyone want to share with us their findings?
So I think it's not debatable what's received from,
Okay.
direct them. That's not debatable.
Okay, derived.
Derived, I would just, somewhat. So I gave it a 3 because those laws are derived from written.
Right.
So it's oral. So a lot of people, I think, have a problem. Like they don't really. Oral is a little difficult, a little more difficult.
Well, it's all
Legislative.
oral. It's all oral. It's all tradition, right? So even received is oral. It's
Oh.
person to person.
So then I don't think it's debatable then. If
Yeah.
it's
I put 1 for received and derived.
Okay, interesting.
yeah.
But legislative, I did 4.
And customs.
Customary.
And then customary, I actually put down 1 and 4 because they're, 2 types of people. Like, it's like, oh, it's my family's custom. Of course, I'm not going to debate it. Although there's some kids who are like, oh, my family's doing this. I can't do this. I want to do something else. So,
Okay,
Right.
interesting. So very good. We're on a good track. Let's go to page 114, text number 2A. I'm going to read. This is from the Maimonides in the introduction to his book, the Yala Chazaka, in introduction to the Mishnah, where he explains the background of the Mishnah. And he writes as follows. There are no debates at all with regard to the explanations we received from Moses. There never has arisen a debate among the sages of any era, from Moses until Rav Ashi, who redacted the Talmud, in which one sage said an eye for an eye means literal retaliation, and another sage said the Torah is only referring to monetary compensation, right? So everyone knows the famous verse, an eye for an eye. And we know from the Talmud that does not mean literally. It means monetary compensation. So if someone knocks out someone's eye, God forbid, they have to pay the value of what a person that has sight would be worth versus a person that doesn't have sight would be worth. So you're paying the value of an eye. And what's interesting is that we never found in our history, among outside scholars, people might have said eye for an eye means literally. But among our scholars, no one in the 3,000 years of tradition has ever suggested that an eye for an eye means literally. Any real rabbi, any rabbi with smicha, any sage has always translated eye for an eye to mean to pay the monetary value. And why is that? Seemingly, if there's a place for interpretation, then there should be someone throughout history that thinks that eye for an eye means literally. And the answer is because that interpretation, that eye for an eye does not mean literally, but rather it means monetary, is something that Moses told us on Mount Sinai. And therefore, that's not something that's up for interpretation. That's not something that's up for arguments. Only someone who doesn't believe in tradition, someone that's outside of our circle of Torah, is going to possibly say that eye for an eye means literally. But anyone that is part of our tradition knows that there is only one translation for eye for an eye, which means the monetary value. Let's continue. Likewise, there never arose a dispute over the meaning of the verse, on the first day you shall take the fruit of the hadar tree. So we know that on Sukkot we take 4 species. One of them is the etrog. The etrog is not written in the Torah. In the Torah it says you should take a beautiful fruit. You should take a fruit from the hadar tree. Which fruit is that? There is no argument about that. And never in our history has there ever been an argument about that. No one ever showed up and said, well, I think it might be a pomegranate. Everyone agrees that it's an etrog. And why? The answer is one simple reason, because Moses showed us an etrog in the desert. And he said, this is what the Bible is referring to. So if someone doesn't believe in tradition, then they could be stumped and they might make up their own ideas. Maybe they'll say, well, any beautiful fruit you could take. But we know that that's not true. We know there's only one fruit, and that's the etrog, which you could take on Sukkot, and there's never been an argument about that, and there never will be an argument about that. So regarding the verse, on the first day of Sukkot, you shall take the fruit of the hadar tree, whereby one sage said that this fruit was an etrog, and another said it referred to a quince, a pomegranate, or some other fruit. There's never been such an argument. There's never been a dispute. Nor have we come across any disagreement whether anaf etz avot refers to myrtle branches. So the same thing applies to the myrtle that we take on Sukkot, that there is no argument about that either, although the words in the Bible do not necessarily say a myrtle. We understand it to mean a myrtle, not because we derive it from Torah, but because Moses showed us a myrtle. He told us this is what Torah is referring to, and therefore there is no place for argument. What the Rambam essentially is telling us here, what Maimonides essentially is telling us here, is that one of the most underlying principles of our faith is the recognition that our tradition is secure. As we spoke about in our very first class regarding the way the Torah was given over, right, we asked the question about why wouldn't we think that the Torah went through a series of broken telephone? And we spoke about the tradition of Torah starting from Moses, being given over to Aaron, being given over to his sons and to the 70 elders and to the Jews, how it was constantly repeated and repeated and repeated in front of the masses, and how that continued to hold until the time of the Mishnaic era, where the Talmud, where these laws were written down in writing. So regarding our tradition from Moses, or what's called the received Torah, there is absolutely no argument about this. And with that, I'll invite you to page 116, text 2b, where the Rambam makes this opinion very clearly, Maimonides, and he continues and he says it would be very strange and disgraceful for a person to think that the Talmudic disagreement are about laws received from Moses, and that the debates ensued from forgetfulness or error, where one person's tradition was correct, but the other did not receive it properly, forgot it, or did not study it sufficiently from teachers. This view is incorrect and inconsistent with the principles of Judaism. It slurs the people from whom we receive the Torah and amounts to empty talk. It basically suggesting such a thing, that perhaps we could be arguing about what we received from Moses, would essentially be undermining the entire truth of the Torah. What brings people to believe such faulty ideas is that they are insufficiently versed in the words of the Talmudic sages. They therefore fail to draw a distinction between the basic explanation that we receive from Moses and the laws that the sages derived through analysis. Okay. And I think an important point here is to just add that if there was something that was forgotten, and there has been things forgotten in the past, you wouldn't have a differing opinion saying the opposite. If someone doesn't know something, they say, I don't know. And that's very common in Talmud, for us to say, I don't know. And if someone knows it, then they'll say it. You wouldn't have someone that's unsure about their tradition saying, oh, Moses actually told us a pomegranate, or Moses told us it could be a pomegranate or an etrog. If we remember that it was an etrog, it was an etrog. And if we don't remember, we would say, I don't know. So that's a very simple understanding of why there would not be an argument when it comes to received Torah. So just to sum up what we said, when we have the received Torah, which is the God-given explanations for each of the commandments, the answer is there is no place for multiple opinions. However, when it comes to the derived Torah, which is the laws that we derive from the written Torah and the received oral Torah, with the instructions given by God, with the 13 principles, here there is place for multiple opinions, which we will get to, and we'll talk about that.
I thought that would be no.
Right.
Interesting.
And the same thing would be about legislations. Obviously, there would be different opinions. And the same thing would be about customs. Obviously, there's different customs. Okay. So let us talk about that derived Torah. And I'm going to give you one example of an argument from a derived area of Torah. And that is the very case that I started this class with. So I asked you, in a situation when you have Sam and Mark that are walking in the desert and their lives are at risk, and Mark would either share his water with Sam and then they possibly both die and they possibly both live, or he doesn't share and he lives and the other one dies. That was the question that I asked you, and this is a question that's asked in the Talmud, and there's an argument about this question. We have two opinions. But what's interesting is that these two opinions, we also had two opinions here. We had Linda and we had Judy, but these two opinions in the Talmud aren't their own opinions. They aren't saying what I think. They're saying what they think God thinks. And they are arguing on how to derive it from the verse. So let's see this. There's a verse in the Torah which says, "You shall not take interest from him," namely from another person, "fear your God, and let your brother live with you." Now, what's interesting is that the previous verse says the very same words, "and let your brother live." So these words, "and let your brother live with you," according to our tradition, based on the 13 principles of derivation, these words are extra, and they're here to teach us something. And everyone agrees with that. All the rabbis agree that these three words, "and let your brother live with you," are teaching us something. And as a matter of fact, both of these rabbis will agree that they're teaching us something within the same scenario. Both of them agree that these words are teaching us whether Mark should share his water with Sam. But they have an argument as to what it's teaching us. Does anyone want to take a stab at it? Is there any way to derive from these words, "and let your brother live with you," whether the Torah thinks that Mark should share his water, or Torah thinks that Mark should not share his water?
I don't see the connection.
You
So
don't see the
we're,
connection.
so we're using an example of water. It's funny because I work for an Israeli smart water bottle company, but putting that aside, I mean, what about bankers? Like, banks take interest.
So we're not talking about the interest thing. We're not getting caught up with interest.
Oh,
It's a great
okay.
question, and it's a great question. It's a separate discussion. Torah does not allow interest. There are circumstances where you could set it up that it's not legally interest, and therefore it works. If there's a bank that is owned by a Jew, then they would have to have set this up to be kosher.
Huh.
You have
So
to
let-
talk with a rabbi. You
Have
have
a
to
talk
work
with
that out.
Citibank.
But this is not a question about loans. Here we're discussing these extra words that the Torah writes, which is, "let your brother live with you." And I'm asking if anyone could read into these words whether the Torah, if these words were to be telling us whether I should be sharing my water or not, which one of the two is it telling us? That's the question I'm asking you. Although obviously it's not explicit. But if I know that these words are teaching me one or the other, which one is it teaching me?
I
To
think
I
Linda,
think
yes.
I think that we have a responsibility to our brothers, meaning brothers as a humanity, and that if there is a possibility to try to save a life, that is what we would try. That's the ultimate
Right.
goal.
So again, Linda, I understand your side of things, and that makes a lot of sense. There's also the other side of things, which is maybe my life. I'm obligated to save my life before their life.
But you're not assured
Maybe
of that in this scenario. Possibility.
so
If
here
you
it
said
becomes
definitively, to me that he will definitely die. Sam will die, definitely die without water. You said the possibility of them. The word possibility gives you that it's not definitive.
Okay.
It's not
Okay. And also,
definitive.
I guess I think another add-on to that question, Linda, would be, there's two aspects to the question here, and I'm not going to go into that in detail over here, but there are two aspects of the question. One question would be, are you obligated to share your water? Meaning, are you obligated to put your life at risk to help the other person live at least one more day? That's question number one, meaning,
Right.
is there no obligation or am I obligated? So there's a difference between saying you're allowed to versus you're obligated to. And then the
Right.
second question would be, am I allowed to? So am I allowed to put my life at risk, knowing that there's a chance that I'm not going to survive another 2 days,
Right.
to give someone else an extra day of life? So there's obviously subtlety to this question, but here the question isn't what's right and wrong on our point of view. The question is, what does God say?
Hashem. I would say
Um,
no. I would say no.
but how do you derive it from the words? And let your brother live with you. Judy, you want to say something? Lisa wanted to say something. Sorry, I'll get back to Judy in a second. Lisa, what do you want to say?
No. I think, to let your brother live with you is you got to share what you have. And
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. Judy, yes.
So I think the same because the verse says live with you. So like if you're with you means you have to share.
Okay, very good. Adi, you want to
But
say
I
something?
think it's relative. I mean, of course, we have to be kind and we have to share, but water is life, and if you don't drink water, maybe you're okay for like a day or so, but then ultimately you're going to die if you don't
Okay,
drink
so
water.
you heard it from the Israeli water
Right, yeah.
spokesman.
But and
Buy
it's funny, they're
Israeli
based in
water.
Rehovot also, which is very funny because that's the wells with Yitzchak and the wells. But I think when it comes to someone's life, a life is so precious. You can help, make sure that someone will stay
So
alive.
let's see it inside. Page 119, text 3b. And we have over here a piece of Sifra, which is from the time of the Mishnah, and it reads as follows. Two people were traveling in the desert, and one of them has only a flask of water. If he drinks it, he will reach town. If both of them drink it, they will both die.
Oof.
Ben Petura derived that both should drink from it and die.
Oof.
As it says, let your brother live with you. Rabbi Akiva said to him, let your brother live with you, implying your life takes precedence over the life of another. Kind of like someone saying, come with me to the restaurant, or let's go to the restaurant together. With me is implying that there's a primary and a secondary. So we have over here, let your brother live with you. We have Ben Petura, which says with you implies the same as you, which means share your water. And Rabbi Akiva says with you means secondary to you, do not share your water. Whether we agree with Ben Petura or Rabbi Akiva is really not part of our conversation. And I'll tell you why. Number one, because it's beyond the scope of our conversation. Number two is because you're talking about two rabbis here who, aside from the fact that they devoted their entire lives to study of Torah, in addition, you're talking about world geniuses. Einstein's plus many, many times over. And therefore, as well as the fact that they have authority to make such a suggestion. So what I personally will do, which we'll actually get to this later in the class, when I hear this argument, what I want to do is dive deep into both of their opinions and to discover the truth of both of their opinions. Right? So when Linda Sandman tells me something and Judy Yurkovich tells me the opposite, I respect both of them. I don't know which one to listen to. But when Ben Petura says one thing and Rabbi Akiva says the opposite, I say they both must be correct. They both must have a very strong point, and I want to actually discover the truth of both of them. But in any case, the point that I was just trying to bring out with this argument is simply to show you an example where we could argue on how to derive something from the Torah. So there's the 13 principles that we have, and following those 13 principles, There are many things that unanimously everyone agrees with, but then there are some things that there is argument about. Do we derive it this way, or do we derive it a different way?
But Rabbi, when you look at like you're on the airplane, right? And if God forbid there's an issue in the airplane, you put on your oxygen mask before you put it on your child. I
So
mean, that's
again,
just a
we're
rule.
not here to argue the
Oh,
moral of it and whether it's right and wrong, because that's for bigger and better people, and we could argue that. That's just not the conversation of our
yeah.
discussion. I think there's both sides,
Yeah.
and we clearly see that there's both sides, and that would be the conversation to have. Okay, moving right along. So um, here is one interesting point before we continue, which is we have discussed previously that aside from there being the received laws and the derived laws, there are received laws that are also derived. Do we recall such a concept? So there are laws that Moses tells us, he showed it to us on Mount Sinai, yet we also derive it from a verse. And we find in the Talmud are possible arguments regarding these laws. So the point that we're making over here, the sensitivity that we're going to have over here is that the arguments regarding these laws are never going to be regarding the law, but it will only be regarding how we derive the law. So I'll repeat that. When it comes to deriving a law, we could have an argument how to derive it and what the law will be. But when it comes to how to derive a received law, the law won't be argued because it's received. But the derivation, the how to derive it may be argued. And I'll give you an example. So when it comes to the etrog, so we spoke about that example, that everyone agrees that the beautiful fruit is referring to an etrog. How do we know that? Because Moses showed that to us on Mount Sinai. There is no argument about that. But the Talmud does have an argument about the etrog. And that argument is, how do we derive the etrog from the verse? And there's three different opinions. One opinion tells us that because it says that it's a fruit of a hadar tree, hadar means beautiful, it also means to live. And therefore, well, before that, there's an opinion that says that it's a fruit where the tree and the bark actually taste the same. And that would be that of the etrog. The other opinion says that it's from the word hadar, which means to dwell for 12 months on the tree. An etrog is a fruit that dwells for 12 months on a tree. And the third opinion is that it's a fruit that grows in much water, which comes from the word hadar, which means to hydrate. It's the same word, a similar word with a similar source. These are three opinions on how we derive the etrog from the tree. Now, what's interesting is that all three opinions agree on which fruit it is. The only question is how we got there. So what makes you wonder, why would all three opinions, if they all learn it from a different part of the verse, why do they all come to the same conclusion? And the answer is because we start backwards, right? It's like the person that throws the dart and then makes the circle around it. We start from the conclusion and then we understand how we derived it from the verse. Moses told us the conclusion. Moses told us that this fruit means an etrog. We then want to go on and see, okay, could we derive it from the Torah? And here we have three different opinions on how to derive it.
Yes.
Based on the 13 principles that we were taught. Does this make sense? Any questions?
No.
Okay, clear. We actually see this distinction between received laws and derived laws very clearly from the following text. So turn to page 122 in your booklet, and I'm looking at text number 5. And this is a piece of Mishnah where Rabbi Akiva is talking to his teacher. And Rabbi Akiva asks a question to his teacher regarding a certain law. And Rabbi Akiva's teacher tells him the answer. And he tells him a derivation. He tells him how we learn it. He says we learn it from a certain Kal V'chomer. And Rabbi Akiva tells him that Kal V'chomer that you just told me is faulty. that way that you derived it from the verse is actually faulty. And he says the following words. Read it, and let's read it inside 122, text 5. Rabbi Akiva said, if it is a law passed down from Sinai, we will accept it. But if you are deriving it, it can be disproved. So he shows him clearly how when God gave us the 13 principles and he said, derive the laws, then each of the rabbis have that license to figure out the truth of God's intent. And therefore, there's place for argument. And there's place for discussion. But if you're telling me what Moses told us at Mount Sinai, then obviously you're correct. Obviously, there is no place for argument. Obviously, that is what God said on Mount Sinai. Okay. The same will also apply to legislations. When it comes to legislations, there definitely could be different views, whether we should issue a legislation or not. An example of that would be, last week we spoke about the ban on polygamy. So shortly after the Talmud was written, polygamy was permitted in Jewish tradition, in Jewish law, and a rabbi came around and said polygamy is no longer beneficial and we are going to ban it. However, that rabbi was actually a rabbi in the Ashkenazi communities. And therefore, that ban only took hold in the Ashkenazi communities. And indeed, in the Sephardic community, there was never a ban on polygamy, to the point that there are Sephardim, I don't know about like today currently, but there are Sephardic communities that allow polygamy. Many Sephardic communities will include it in the ksuba, in the marital contract, that the woman will condition her husband that I'm only marrying you on condition that you will not marry another woman so long that I'm married to you. But that's each to their own. That's personal. That has nothing to do with a global legislation by the rabbis. So here is an example where we have a real legislation that a rabbi came and he made a decree on the Jewish nation, no polygamy, and it only takes hold in certain circles because there are differing opinions, or not everyone took that upon themselves. Not all the communities were under the jurisdiction of that rabbi. And definitely when it comes to customs, there will definitely be different opinions. We talk about whether we have kitniot, whether we eat rice on Passover. So Ashkenazi communities definitely don't, and the Sephardic communities definitely do. So we have various different customs or opinions when it comes to that area of Torah. Okay, so with that, I'm going to return to our opening question of tonight's class, and the question is: did we answer our opening question? Are there debates about facts? We asked if Torah is the word of God. How could we be debating it? And the answer was no, there are no debates regarding the facts. There are no debates regarding the Torah as it was given on Mount Sinai. The debates are in the area that God allowed there to be debate. The debates are where God said, it's up to you to derive from the Torah, and here it becomes debate, how exactly should it be derived? However, I feel like that does not answer the question completely. Because how could I say that the Oral Torah is divinely given when there is yet debate and argument? We discussed this in our first, I think in our second class. We quoted a Mishnah, or we quoted a Medrash, which said how all of Torah, including the explanations of Torah, including the derived Torah, was given by God, is godly given, is divine. And I would think that God, being a God, if he was able to create a world that with planets that don't contradict each other, and with human bodies that work in sync and work perfectly, I would think he's able to write a manuscript that doesn't issue debate, that doesn't issue argument. Wouldn't he have been successful to write something with the proper instructions to properly understand his intention?
Yeah.
And if we find that there's argument that seems to suggest that no, he could not do that, or he chose not to do that, and therefore we could never know, even if there's no argument, whether what we derive is God's divine will, God's divine intention, because there's room for mistake. If there's room for argument, it would seem that there's room for mistake. And here comes the epiphany of what Oral Torah is really all about. And that is that multiple and divergent opinions don't start with the human mind, they start with God Himself. When we have two opinions in the Talmud, when we have Rabbi Akiva, which says, don't give the water, and we have, I don't remember who it was, the other rabbi who said, do give the water. Indeed, these aren't starting from these two rabbis. They're starting from God. God says that there are two opinions. God says that there is two truths. There is room to give the water and there's room not to give the water. And that's why God wrote the Torah perfectly, that we will be able to derive both opposing opinions, conflicting opinions from the very same words, because these words actually encapsulate both truths. Let's turn to page 126, text number 9a. 126, text number 9a. And this is a Talmud. And Talmud reads as follows. Some sages rule that an object is ritually impure, and others rule that it is pure. Some forbid while others permit. Some disqualify while others declare fit. A person might ask, why study Torah under such circumstances? The verse therefore says, all were given from one shepherd. One God gave them. One leader communicated them from the mouth of God. As it is written, and God spoke all these words. This message that we have conflicting opinions in the Talmud, we have different takes to one story, is actually telling us that both of these have a kernel of truth. Both of them come from God. I'll move over to text number 9c, and it reads as follows. For 3 years, there was a dispute between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. The former asserting the halacha is in agreement with our views, and the latter contending the halacha is in agreement with our views. A heavenly voice declared, these and these are the words of the living God.
Oh,
this is the famous joke of the two guys that come to the rabbi, and they're arguing, and the rabbi turns to one of them and says, let me hear your opinion. And he tells him his opinion. He says, you're right. And then he turns to the other one and he listens to his opinion and he says, you're also right. So finally, the third person in the room turns to the rabbi and says, how could they both be right? And he says, you're also right.
yeah. It's frustrating,
Okay.
right?
It's frustrating. So
frustrating, yeah. I like a clear cut, give me an answer. Don't give me opinions. I want to know. Is it wait 3 hours or 6 hours after you eat, after meat, before you eat dairy?
Right.
So many different opinions.
So there's going to be one answer for you. There's going to be one truth for you, but there's different opinions in terms of what the truth is. So we'll get to that in a second. We'll get to that shortly. Okay, so what did we say? What did we discover? We discovered that actually every opinion that we see in Torah is true. Every opinion that we see in Torah is part of God's wisdom, which is why we will actually say a blessing on the Torah, which we know there's a blessing that you say before you study Torah. And we say the blessing on the Torah even when we're studying the opinion, which is not the halacha. Nevertheless, I still make a blessing on the Torah because that's also Torah. That's also God's wisdom. Okay. Everything that's included in Talmud is God's wisdom. And this is a little bit of the background for us to understand a little bit more on how that is or what that's all about. Everything in the world is multifaceted, which basically means that any situation, any given situation, you have different truths. When two people come to court and one says I'm right and the other person says I'm right, they're both right in a certain facet, in a certain aspect of it. And the question always is, so which one is more right? But sometimes it's not so clear which one is more right. Sometimes it depends how you look at it. And since the world is multifaceted, therefore we could have multiple opinions. We could see it from different lenses. And both of them will be true. Both of them will be telling us a truth of the situation at hand. So if I just want to know the truth, if I just want to know what I'm supposed to do, just tell me what to do. Then opinions are confusing. Opinions are not fun. But if I'm actually here to learn and discover, opinions are so much fun because of what they do is they actually give me insight into the multifaceted aspects of my reality. Going back to that conversation about the water, and I know many people in this over here, sitting here, were very strongly opinionated one way or another. But what the argument actually tells me is that both of them are true. So what the halacha is a separate discussion. And how do we come to the halacha? How do we come to the final conclusion? That's a great question. We'll get to that. But for now, the question is going to be, so what's the truth of both of them? And in yeshiva, I could spend 4 hours, 5 hours discovering the truth of Rabbi Akiva and discovering the truth of the other opinion. And properly chewing over and understanding and seeing the truth behind it, seeing the light behind both of these opinions. There's a reason why thousands of people, over thousands of years, and you're talking about great scholars, talking about Einsteins and bigger, have spent their entire lives studying opinions that we don't actually hold of. People study Talmud more than they study any other part of Torah literature. People study Talmud more than they study the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, which is practical Jewish law. And you would say, why are you wasting your time with the arguments if you could just study practical law? And the answer is because Torah study is not about knowing what to do. It's also about that. But more importantly, it's about discovering God and God's wisdom. And when I have differing opinions, and specifically when I have differing opinions, do I get an insight into the vastness of God's wisdom and the multifaceted aspects of God's view of our reality. Which is why many people will look at the Talmud debate as a musical harmony. Unlike when you have different voices screaming and they seem to be clashing, a Talmudic debate is actually like two different pieces of instrument playing different notes, but they work perfectly in sync, bringing out each other's beauty. That you only have that when they are both true. You only have that when like we said, that the heavenly voice said that both this opinion and that opinion are both true. Yes, Lisa.
So, is this like each opinion? Does it depend on the perspective of what name they're using from Hashem? Like, what is sometimes coming from Elohim, or if it's coming from Avinu Malkeinu, like is our father. So it's very loving interpretation. No.
So that would be more like a Kabbalistic approach on Torah, not so much a halachic approach on Torah. The halachic approach uses, like I mentioned, the 13 principles of deriving from Torah, but based on the personality of the person is how you're going to use those 13 principles. And I think we're going to focus more on this next week. But this is actually what I think is the most beautiful part of this concept, which is that Torah and the Jewish people are married They're perfectly one. And we'll see this next week to the extreme of it. But this is true to the point that God gave Torah to the Jewish people, and he said, it's up to you to decide the truth. When a Jewish person, and this is what we believe, when a Jewish person approaches the Torah with a Jewish soul, and they approach the Torah in a Jewish manner, in a Jewish fashion, not in a open-minded, worldly fashion to undermine the Torah, but in a fashion with the proper discipline, the proper devotion to the Torah, and they come to recognize their own opinion, their own view of the words that they're learning, God says that too is part of Torah. And that actually makes up the Torah. The Jewish people are not just studiers of the Torah, but in a way, we are partners with God in the Torah wisdom, because Torah, being the wisdom of God, is endless wisdom. And it's up to us as limited individuals with a piece of God within ourselves to extract as much of that wisdom as we could. And the more Jewish people study Torah, and the more opinions we have of the Torah, and again, I want to emphasize proper study of Torah, Torah study with the proper discipline of Torah study that Torah study deserves, each one of us actually are extracting another gem, another truth to the Torah. So when someone comes over to me and says, Adi will come over to me and say, I was studying this passage of the Talmud, and I think that this is the meaning of the Talmud. I'm excited to hear her opinion, because even if it's differing from mine, on the contrary, because it's differing from mine, it's now a new opportunity for me to hear a new truth, a new view, a new perspective that is also true from God's perspective, which is why every single Jew, we spoke about this in the past, is actually obligated to find their part of Torah and to find novelty within Torah. Because we have that ability, we have that license, and we have that connection to Torah. Torah and the Jewish people are married, we're one. And by us approaching the Torah through our own lens, we actually uncover for the world new truths that have never been discovered until now. Which is why it's always been in Jewish history the custom that Jewish people publish new works of Torah, and not only the great rabbis, but even laymen. Obviously, a great rabbi that's spent much more time and many more hours and knows much more, his word will be taken more seriously and with more weight. But any person has that spark of God allowing them to uncover new truths, new ideas within Torah, which is what, yeshiva boys are doing, spending hours and hours over one line of Gemara. They want to discover their truth of the Talmud.
I mean, it's like an onion layer. You just keep peeling it and you just keep learning more and more. And every year that you read the same parasha over and over, you just
Exactly.
uncover something else.
Okay, so that's all beautiful and wonderful. But the question is, so then how do we know the halacha? What, Lisa, what did you say?
Yeah, no, that was going to be my question. So how do you know?
Okay, so how do we decide halacha? That's a very good question. Because the problem with halacha, I don't know if it's the problem, but the thing with halacha is that it's actual, it's practical. So it's very nice that differing opinions are all true, but which one am I supposed to do actually? What am I supposed to follow in practicality? So here comes an interesting text. And this text teaches us that not only do we have this question, but actually Moses had this very question. Join me on page 132, text 12. And the text reads as follows. 132, text 12. For each law that God told Moses, he would enumerate 49 arguments for ruling that an object was ritually pure, and 49 arguments for ruling the argument that the object was ritually impure. So we already see that God himself told Moses that when it comes to the derived oral Torah, there is a place for arguments. So Moses turned to God frantically and said, so then what will we do? Moses said before him, Master of the universe, how will we be able to reach the practical conclusion? And if we pause for a second to understand Moses' question, Moses understands that the practical halacha is the will of God. So the differing opinions are the wisdom of God. But what we're actually going to do is the will of God. So what do you want us to do? Do you want us to do this one or do you want us to do that one? Should I share my water or should I not share my water? I understand that in terms of your wisdom, they're both true. And I could discover that and I could study that. But which one do you want me to actually do? And how will I know what's your desire? God responded, follow the majority. This is a verse in Exodus. If the majority rules it is ritually impure, it is impure. If the majority rules pure, it's pure. So God gave us a very, very simple and clear formula. He said, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel are going to argue. I want you to know that both of their opinions are true. But you're going to follow Beit Hillel because he's the majority. If you ever have an argument, discover it, argue it. And if you see that at the end of the day, there's still an argument, count the hands and you go with the majority. This is true in terms of every given situation. So when we have two people come to court and one person says he owes me money, the other person says he doesn't owe me money. So we argue it out and we go after the majority of the rabbis, the majority of the judges. And the same will be true when we have a question about how to derive something from Torah, or a question about whether we should enact a law. All of this will be argued by the rabbis, and we will be going after the majority. I'm going to get to BA, I'll get to you in a second. So what's interesting about this is in terms of our historical background, in terms of history, as long as we had a Sanhedrin, which was the high court of 71 sages, the greatest sages of the time, who would sit in the Holy Temple, they were the last word. So any question that was unsettled would eventually come to them, and they would argue it, and if they weren't able to come to a conclusion, they would follow the majority. Once the Talmud was created, the Talmud too has that level of the last word. And the reason for that is because all the rabbis at the time were involved in the writing of the Talmud, and all the Jews at the time accepted the Talmud. And therefore, the Talmud becomes the halacha, the last word when it comes to Jewish law, in terms of the debates. So anything that the Talmud sides with, any debate that the Talmud sides with, we go with that. So is there room for debate today? Is there room for two different rabbis to say two different opinions? The answer is yes. And it could be one of three scenarios. Either it could be a situation where the rabbis are debating the meaning of the Talmud. So maybe the Talmud itself is unclear, and the rabbis are debating that. And there's still room for debate. Perhaps it could be a situation where the question only arose after Talmudic times. So today you have situations which are modern questions, and the way we will try to understand the answers is from the Talmud. But the rabbis will be studying the Talmud and trying to derive the answers from the Talmud, and there's place for debate. And finally, there are times that the Talmud gives us a debate and doesn't tell us the answer. The Talmud itself leaves it unresolved. And in those situations, it's up to the following rabbis to try to resolve the practical halacha, the practical answer, the practical situation. In which case, generally the same rules are taken. The rabbi will try to see the majority of rabbis before him, what are the opinions, and go with the majority. Practically, we follow whatever our local rabbi is, whatever the opinion of our local rabbi. And again, it's important to emphasize that you're talking about a rabbi, even a rabbi that has the proper smicha to be stating their opinion regarding that particular situation. Even myself, who has smicha, but I wouldn't be authorized to, argue in terms of a halachic question. You're talking about specific experts in the halachic areas which have specific traditions, and they are the one or the five or the 10 or the 100 rabbis that have authority in this area, and they will argue it out, and either they'll all agree or they will have differing opinions, and generally we will go with the majority. Regarding your question, Lisa, if I have a question, if I should be waiting 3 hours or 6 hours after meet, and which one do I do? And is there an argument? So you ask your local Orthodox rabbi, and whatever he tells you is the halach for you, is the will of God for you. There isn't two opinions. Although there are two opinions, and they're both the will of God, but there's only one thing that you should be doing, which is following your rabbi. Bia, you had a question.
If you're talking about the majority, how do you explain that only 20% left Egypt? I mean, the majority said you should stay.
So
And
that was
so
something
they
that,
stayed.
so that was obviously something that God decided. And that obviously goes
Debated is what I was just thinking, that's all.
what?
She was just thinking.
It must have been, I was thinking, sorry, I'm still sick. I was thinking that it was probably debated at the time, and the majority said stay, 20% left, and then the Exodus happened.
Actually,
so-
some also left prior to the Exodus.
Right. So that was a separate conversation. We won't get into that right now.
Yeah.
But there is a question in the Talmud. One of the Catholic leaders approached one of the rabbis and said, "Your Torah says to follow the majority, and the majority of the world says against Judaism. So shouldn't you be following the majority?" And that's an important point that we have to know that at the end of the day we're going with God's word. So if most of the world says there's no God, we're not going to follow the majority. The majority of rabbis who are ordained that are looking to follow God's word, and they are following the 13 principles that the law was derived from, and they go ahead and they say one way or the other way, in that case we will follow the majority of those rabbis. My father shares an interesting story that when he first came to town, so there was a conservative rabbi who met him, and they were schmoozing, and this conservative rabbi was actually more of a knowledgeable person, or my father thought, a conservative rabbi, he probably knows something, he probably studied some Talmud, and the conservative rabbi was telling him about different changes that the conservative movement made to Judaism. And my father was saying, like, how do you go ahead and change Judaism? And he said, that there's just like the rabbis in the Talmud change different things. So also today you have different rabbis that change different things. So my father said, so you mean to say that you use the 13 principles to derive different things from the Torah? And he said, which 13 principles?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to understand that there is certain, a background that you're supposed to have, and again, a Jewish way of approaching Torah to be able to have that ability. Yes, Lisa.
Thank you. So, my question is, when it's immoral, when there's absolutely no debate, and the Jewish law is immoral, like for instance, for an aguna, that she can't be granted if the husband decides he doesn't want to grant the get.
Yeah.
She should never get married. And I think that within the rabbis now in the Bet Din, I think they recognize this, and they're allowing that it be written in the prenup that they have to give the get, and that
Right, so that would be an example for a jurisdiction where there is something that Torah says. Torah says that you can't get married without a get, and there's nothing that we could do about it. It's kind of like a stalemate or a checkmate. and it's an unfortunate situation. So the rabbis will come in and try to see, what could we do? We can't undo that. That's God's will. That's God's word. But what could we do to fix an unfortunate situation? And the prenup would be an example for that. In biblical times, in times of when we had our own king and our own monarchy, then there wasn't a place for such a problem, because such a person would be punished and forced to give the get. So the only problem is today we don't have that ability to do that. Okay, so
Thank you.
sure. So what we discovered today is we discovered where there is not debate in Jewish law, where there is place for debate in Jewish law, and how, nevertheless, is that debate divine, and how do we derive the conclusion, the halachic conclusion. What we will now be talking about is why did God want it this way? So we did discover this concept of, we discovered the concept of how different opinions, opposing arguments, are actually bringing out different truths of God. And that is definitely one perspective, one point. But here is a final point. Let's turn to page 137 in our booklet, text number 15. The Mishnah writes as follows, and this is the last Mishnah of the entire set of Mishnayos. And it writes as follows: God found no better vessel than peace to hold blessing for the Jewish people. For it says, the Lord shall grant strength to his people, the Lord shall bless his people with peace. This is the last Mishnah of the entire Mishnayos, which is interesting because the entire Mishnayos is full of debate. And suddenly the Mishnah seems to be advocating peace. And why is that, and how is that? And the answer is, this is actually what diversity is all about. Unity only comes about through diversity. One man alone on an island doesn't have peace. They have loneliness. A single person living alone doesn't have a peaceful life. They have a lonely life. A marriage, which constitutes different people, diversity, and argument, could have peace, could have unity. And essentially, this is what Torah is all about. Torah is about bringing unity to the world, where God, before he created the world, didn't have peace. He had loneliness. He created the world because he was looking for peace. And to have peace, you have to have diversity. And therefore, he created a diverse world with differing opinions. But when we recognize that all of those differing opinions are coming, they all stem from one truth, from one God, then from the diversity we have unity. When we have different opinions, but through the methodology that God gave us, we are able to derive the conclusion. And everyone agrees that we will follow the majority. We have diversity uniting. We have 71 people in a room with 71 different opinions, and now they all agree. They all agree that we follow the majority. And ultimately, whichever one they follow, the rest of the rabbis who disagreed will now spend their time understanding the truth of the other opinion. Peace requires opposites, and this is indeed the purpose of the entire universe, of the entire creation. Just like Adam and Eve, the Torah tells us that God created Adam and Eve back to back, and then he divided them into two. He divided them into two because so long they were one, they weren't able to have a real relationship. They were back to back. And now that they're two, and now they're able to fight and argue, they're also able to come to a perfect unity, a unity of face-to-face. This is the purpose of the universe, and this is the way that God set up Torah itself. Okay, And with
Thank you.
that, what I want to do is right now two things. I want to play the point by point, the summary video where it goes through all the points that we studied today. And then I'm going to play for you a video, which is part of a course given on Chabad.org, where this man who I love all this stuff, and in particular, I love this course. It's called Scroll Down, and I highly suggest it to go to Chabad.org/courses and to find the course called Scroll Down. And he goes through the Jewish library, giving you the history of the Torah, the prophets, the writings, going through the Mishnah, the Medrash, the Sifra, Sifri, the Talmud, the Responsa, and the Code of Jewish Law, etc., up until today, really bringing you through the entire Jewish library. And he's extremely talented and fun, as you'll see. So in this short video, he will be giving us some of the background of the Talmud and how it differs from the Mishnah. Because very often I said Mishnah, Talmud. We spoke about how the Mishnah was written by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. He was the one that wrote down the Oral Torah for the first time. Following him came the Talmud, and what exactly is the Talmud and the Mishnah? How do they differ from each other? And some other very interesting things we will see about the Talmud, I will show you in this following video. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Lesson
Thank you.
4. Key points. 1. There are no rabbinic debates regarding the received Oral Torah, but it is common for debates to appear in the derived, legislated, and customary categories of Torah. 2. At times, God embedded in the Torah multiple clues leading to variant outcomes. The resultant dissenting opinions are therefore both the words of the living God. 3. Both conflicting opinions reflect a divine perspective regarding the case under discussion, and it is only through hearing all perspectives that we learn about the object or case in its entirety. 4. The final halakha was determined by the majority of the Sanhedrin. 5. The Talmud's rulings are binding for all Jews, inasmuch as the majority of Jewish sages of its day ratified its decisions. 6. Rabbinic debates are a paradigm of peaceful relations. Peace requires divergent viewpoints that then peacefully resolve. When the Sanhedrin was operational, a legal dispute ideally ended with the minority agreeing with the majority ruling. Next week, are there areas of Jewish law that can use change or repeal? If yes, who has the authority to amend or revoke? A heavenly voice? A prophet? A sage? Is modifying rabbinic enactments a simple process? After all, what human beings create, they should be able to abrogate. When we meet next time, we will consider these important questions.
Okay. Here is the next video. And again, I'll repeat it. It's part of a course from Scroll Down on Chabad.org. It's an incredible course, and I highly recommend it. This is just a snippet which talks about the Talmud, which I think will give a lot of insight.
The Mishnah is like a zip file, or better still, a Lego kit. Say you're a Lego master and you've built some beautiful structures in Lego that you have strewn all around your living room. And now you'd like to share some of these structures with a friend of yours who lives across the ocean. What's the best way to do that? Well, fill up a box full of Lego and put together a little manual of all the structures that you've made. Put that in the box as well and send that across the ocean. And there, they'll be able to open it up and rebuild the structures that you've designed on this side of the ocean. Same thing with a zip file. If a bunch of data shares a certain set of logical structures to it, the non-structural information of the data can be reduced, zipped, to a bare minimum. And the logical structures can be made into an algorithm that reconstructs the data when it's unzipped. Rabbi Yehuda constructed the Mishnah along the same lines. In fact, the Torah served him as a kind of prototype. Any given statement in the Torah is like a zipped file. By itself, it doesn't tell you much. It doesn't tell you how to apply the halacha in all kinds of different circumstances. The file, the verse, needs to be unzipped. Let's take an example. In the Mishneh tractate Chulin, we read as follows: every kind of meat is forbidden to be cooked with milk. How do we apply this rule? Is the meat in question just that of kosher animals, or does the rule also apply to non-kosher animals? Are we talking only about kosher mammals or also kosher birds? And what about the milk? Does it only apply to milk of the same animal, or does it include all types of milk? And does this only apply to milk? What about cheese? What about lasagna or chicken cacciatore or a fish chowder? And what about cooking utensils? Can I cook meat in a pot I usually use to warm my morning cafe latte? And are we talking act of cooking meat and milk as such, even if we have no intention of eating it? And how is this rule derived from the biblical commandment not to boil a kid in its mother's milk? Or is this just a rule formulated by the rabbis? And if so, how do they come up with it? These kinds of questions and many besides are hibernating inside the statement of the Mishnah. How do we wake it up? How do we unzip this file? We have to understand that Rabbi Yehuda assumed that he was dealing with very intelligent people. First of all, everyone knew what he was talking about, more or less. The material was familiar to them for cultural reasons. It was part of their daily life. And secondly, they're willing to put in the work to apply themselves to this algorithmic business of unzipping these files. For 300 years after Rabbi Yehuda Nasi compressed his zip file, the most brilliant minds in Jerusalem, in Israel, and in Babylonia were busy unzipping these files. And we have to remember that we're talking here about the great-great-great-grandfathers of Einstein and Marx and Durkheim and Spinoza and Arendt and Strauss and Strauss. The list of these great-great-great ancestors also goes into the hundreds. Just to name some of the most prominent ones: Rav and Shmuel to begin with, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Rav Bar Kapra, Rav Huna, Rav Yehuda, Bar Achava, Hillel ben Gamliel III, Yehuda II, Reish Lakish, Rav Yochanan, Rav Shmuel ben Nachman, Yitzchak Napcho, Rav of Shiloh, Rav Yosef, Rav Zera, Shimon ben Nazi, Rav Sheshet, Rav Yehoshua. These luminaries, a small stadium full of Einsteins, are known as the Amoraim. And their great unzipped file, taking up 63 tractates and 6,200 pages, and what pages, is known as the Talmud. It was the last two Amoraim, Rav Ashi and Ravina, who put the whole thing together around the year 500. They compiled synopses of all the key discussions of the Amoraim, together with all the references to extra Mishnaic material, what are called Beraitot and Toseftot, that Rav Yehuda had left out, with all the arguments and problems and differences of opinion and internal contradictions and ratiocinations and logicizations and all the work that it took to unzip the Mishnah file. The word Talmud comes from the word limud, to learn. This is really the essence of Jewish literacy. Talmud Torah, the learning of the teaching. And by the way, we're only talking about the Babylonian Talmud here. You thought there was only one Talmud, About 200 years earlier, in the Holy Land, another group of gentlemen put together the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud. There's just not enough hours in the day. The Jerusalem Talmud is a more tightly zipped file, and the rabbis of Jerusalem, in their disputes, were real gentlemen, unlike the rabbis of Babylon, who were known to be charif, piquant in their disputes, which is probably why the Babylonian Talmud won out in popularity. More action, go! Babylonian, go! More nuance, more complexity, more depth. Oh, are you ready to see what a Talmud page looks like? This is no ordinary page, my friends. No, each one of these 6,200 pages is like a complex mosaic that needs its own room at the Smithsonian. Mosaic? Like Moses? Now here's what a page of Talmud actually looks like in its classical format since the 15th century. At the top of each page, we have the name of the tractate and of the chapter and the page number. At the center, we have the Talmud per se. This is composed of two parts. First, the Mishnah, This is the bare bones of the Talmud, as it were, the skeleton. And the flesh of the Talmud, what's known as the Gemara, begins where the Mishnah ends. Typically for each Mishnah, which is a short paragraph, you get a few pages of Gemara, and sometimes many, many pages of Gemara. The Mishnah is written in Hebrew, Mishnaic Hebrew, a slightly later Hebrew than the biblical one. And the Gemara, the discussion among the Amoraim who quote the Tanaim, is written in a legal jargon mixing Hebrew and Aramaic. Aramaic being the lingua franca of the entire region since the establishment of the Babylonian Empire. On the inside of every page, we have the commentary of Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, 11th century commentator from northern France, who explains in very pithy language every little knotty point that we find inside the Gemara. On the outside of the page, we find the Tosafos. These are basically Rashi's grandchildren, literally and metaphorically. Literally, Rabbeinu Tam, the Rashbam, the Ri were sons of Rashi's daughters. But metaphorically, the Tosafists, who numbered in the hundreds, only 44 are known by name, are a school of brilliant commentators working between the 12th and 15th centuries, adding sophistication to Rashi's commentary. And by adding, we should also understand subtracting, because the Tosafists are often quite critical of Rashi, of Grandpa. But this is also a kind of adding, which is why they're called the Tosafists, the adders. And then we have some textual apparatus on the edges of the page. Rabbeinu Hananel, a contemporary of Rashi, the commentary of Rabbi Yoel Sirkish, a 7th century commentator, Rabbi Akiva Eger, an 18th century commentator, the Ein Mishpat, which is an index to the Jewish legal codes, Torah Or, which is a reference apparatus for biblical quotations, Masoros Hashas, which gives us parallel texts and cross-references to identical passages in other tractates. And these 6,500 pages aren't exactly light reading. If you can get through a page in an hour or two, which is what some people do on a daily basis, the Daf Yomi, the daily Talmudic page, that's pretty good. But even that's only a superficial reading. A really diligent, focused Talmudic scholar who spends the appropriate amount of time with a Talmudic page, moving along at cruising speed, will get through 4 pages a day. But that's an expert.
Okay, thank you for joining us. Does anyone have any questions to wrap things up? Or ready to go?
Class, thank you.
Thank you. It was really good.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Rabbi.
And I do want, if you did enjoy his style of teaching, this guy that you were just watching, the name of Rabbi Michal Kigel, is actually a professor in Bar Ilan University. Very, very smart guy. He actually didn't grow up religious. He grew up in a family which didn't believe in God, and he didn't believe in God. And then he discovered Judaism. And he's clearly a very talented person, both in terms of his videos and his entertainment, as well as his information. So I do urge you to go and check that out. He has 2 courses on Chabad.org, along with many, many other videos. And one of them is called Scroll Down, which goes through the entire Jewish library. And this is part of one of the classes. They're not long classes, and they're very entertaining and a lot of fun. Okay. Have a good one. All the best. Good night.
Rabbi Levy, what's the site you mentioned? How to get to the site? It's Chabad JLI?
Chabad.org. I'll also send the link.
Chabad.org?
Yeah, if you Google Chabad.org, scroll down, Google it, that will come up, and then you'll sign up to the course, and then you'll have access.
Thank you.
It doesn't cost any money. You'll get in. Okay.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you.
Take care. Good night.
Thank you. It was wonderful. Bye-bye.